Welcome in, Hawks fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another Believe in Hawks episode. So right before the pod, Hawks in the news hiring a senior VP of basketball operations and also adding somewhat of strategy of analytics to the team. And, it feels like this is a perfect day for me to have invited Hoopswire's own senior NBA writer, Sam Amico, onto the show. Sir, how you doing today, man?
Bryce, I'm doing well. I thought, during the finals, things might slow down a little for the NBA, but we're posting as much news as always. So I guess that beats sitting around, right?
Yeah, I mean, hey, you can never be mad about being active, because some people do look at this as kind of like, all right, it's nothing really gonna go on, but it seems like everybody's trying to get in position for the off season when it comes. But let's go ahead and dive right into it, man. So as I mentioned, the Hawks making some front office moves earlier today. Been a big question once they let go of Landry Fields a few weeks ago, who was going to run the team. They promoted Ansi Salah to the general manager position. Some people wondered, okay, is he going to be the guy, or were they going to try to hire someone more? They were looking for a president of basketball operations. But today, like I said, they hired a senior VP of basketball operations, and Bryson Graham, and then Peter Dinwiddie from the 76ers as well for VP of strategy and analytics. So I just want to get your reaction to those moves, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's good that they made a hire, obviously two hires now before the start of the draft and free agency to help prepare for that. I think the question now becomes: is Ansi your guy? Is he going to be your head of basketball operations? There's talk that they could still hire somebody above him, but for now, the other two that were just hired will report to Ansi. So I think this enables them to at least say, okay, we kind of have a plan in place. We know these guys that are coming in are going to help with the draft, free agency, which is going to be big in Atlanta the following week after the draft in early July. So I think it's a good move. You wanted to get people in place, and I think if you keep Ansi in place and have him as your head of basketball operations, obviously this move of moving on from Landry Fields goes a lot smoother. You're not hiring in somebody else who wants to bring in their own coach and could have his own ideas about the roster. This is somebody, Ansi, obviously, who's been with the program for a while. And I think a move like that helps to make the transition away from your former general manager a lot smoother, and everybody being on the same page.
Yeah, and the thing too about Ansi is one thing that him being with the Spurs and before the Atlanta being with Golden State, they said he was a salary cap expert. Obviously, that's something you're hearing a lot more of nowadays because of the new CBA, how it's changed roster construction, how you build teams. And then, especially focusing on Bryson Graham for the Pelicans, he's a guy who, when I've talked to some people from over the Pelicans that I know, who covers the team, they're like, he's a guy who was there through the dark times. He's been there since 2010. He is credited with finding guys like Trey Murphy, Dyson Daniels, Najee Marshall, guys like that. And the Pelicans have usually drafted well, I would say. They just had injuries. And so a guy who seems like his strength is talent evaluation. And I feel like you still have Kyle Korver, who's an assistant GM. People feel like he's more on the player development side. So it seems like they're just trying to get guys who kind of has a specialty role, which I think is kind of common, I guess, or something that's becoming more common in front offices.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting with Bryson Graham. A lot of people that I had talked to previously kind of felt like he was going to be a Pelicans lifer because he's survived a couple of regimes, and some people thought he could potentially have been the head of basketball operations in New Orleans after David Griffin was let go. Of course, the Pelicans hired Joe Dumars, and that mixed things up there. But yeah, he's got a good history of drafts, and finding kind of those guys who aren't coming into the draft as guys who are expected to change the course of your franchise, but fit very well in an entire program, and have had some good years. As you just said, Pelicans have drafted well. When aside from Zion Williamson, which was a no-brainer at the time, these other guys like Trey Murphy, Dyson Daniels, now with the Hawks, who had a spectacular season. These are guys who Bryson Graham's been credited with finding. So you're bringing in people who have shown success in their roles in other places. And again, it just seems, it's not big, it's not splashy, but as you just said, Bryce, these guys have understood their roles, and that's the way front offices are designed. Okay, I'm going to oversee everything as the head of basketball operations or the GM, and you're going to do this. You're going to focus on, the draft and Peter Dinwiddie. You're going to focus on analytics and what we can do to improve in those areas. So, it's obviously something that two areas that they felt they needed improvement in Atlanta. And I think that, you hired two guys with very good reputations in what they do, and they supposedly do it very well.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess to further expand upon that point, with things that have changed, do you see the league, because I think before you have your president, you have your GM, everything. Like it's or you'll have like the president who makes all the decisions, right? And I kind of mentioned how everybody's kind of focused on one thing. Do you sense that, do you see it as a disadvantage when you have multiple people in a front office making these types of decisions? Or do you prefer you can have a team, but one sole person needs to be the sole decision maker for teams in terms of just how that goes?
Yeah, I think as of now, Ansi's going to be that guy who's making, the sole decisions. But if you go back a ways, and if you've ever seen that movie Moneyball, how the general manager played by Brad Pitt, and they're all sitting around the table, and you have, 8 guys there, or 6 guys, including the director of scouting, and they're talking about getting players for the roster. Well, they're all giving their input and their insights. They go out and do their jobs and bring it back to the president of basketball operations or general manager, whatever his title is, the head of basketball operations. And they sit there and they all offer their input. And then, the head of basketball operations is going to make that final call on whatever the decision is, the pick, the free agent signing, the guy who didn't get drafted that you sign after the draft. So I think it's better to have multiple voices and multiple opinions in the locker room. It used to be back in the day where you had a general manager, assistant general manager, and a head of scouting, and that was it. So this just gives you more of an opportunity, and all NBA teams are doing this now. It gives you more of an opportunity to hear more voices and hear from more experts in their respective, I guess, their respective field or whatever their assignment is. And I just think, this is the way the NBA has gone. It used to be 3 guys. Now it's like 8 or 6 anyway. And yeah, it can't hurt to have more voices and more people offering insights. But, the head of basketball operations is either going to say, yeah, okay, let's do it, or I'm shooting that down.
Yeah, exactly. And so it'll be interesting to see if they even, like I said, do end up hiring a head person. Like I said, it feels like at this point you kind of have the structure in place and you can kind of roll with what you have. And through all indications, it seems like the Hawks have been very happy with Ansi the whole time. It's not a situation where they're questioning it. They've been happy with him. And listen, we don't know, since he was with the team last year, what voice he had in some decisions that made, but clearly they like him after that. So obviously, really looking forward to kind of seeing what they do going into a crucial offseason. And that's where we go into our next topic. So obviously the Hawks are in a position where going into this offseason, you don't make it to the postseason, you lose in the play-in. But a lot of people would say if Jalen Johnson stayed healthy, you'd probably be a playoff team. Trae Young has made mention of postseason. Like it's very clear the goal is we need to be in the postseason next year. Where do you see this team as of right now, especially with the core? Because that's the thing. A lot of people are wondering, do you make the big swing and break it up already? Or do you continue to let the core develop with a lot of young talent that they have currently on the roster?
Yeah, I think that if there's one thing we've learned about the recent finals runs of teams such as Oklahoma City, Indiana, a couple years ago, Denver, even Boston last year, and Dallas, what we're seeing is, big sweeping changes usually aren't great. These teams have all been together a while. Now, Oklahoma City went out and added reinforcements and Isaiah Hartenstein and Alex Caruso. Uh, you look at like Boston had Tatum and Brown as their core and Al Horford, and they went out and got Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. So these aren't big splashy moves, but they're moves that fit. And if you look at a team like Atlanta, well, okay, they do have a young core now. They showed some things last year when healthy, when Jalen Johnson was healthy. And, when the Cavs went on that 15-0 winning streak and the Hawks uh, beat them 2 out of 3 games to start the year, there was a lot of promise there. And I thought the way that Trae Young kind of grew his game and became, I think at first when he went to Atlanta, everybody was kind of thinking he's going to be a poor man's Steph Curry. Now you look at him and it's like he's like a Steve Nash type in the way that he distributed the ball this year. So I think that the pieces are there, and it just another year of organic natural growth from this very roster. I think could lead to a playoff spot and maybe even making some noise in the playoffs. The question is, do you go out and add reinforcements? I would be surprised if they went out and made some huge splashy move. I think it's how do we add to what we have without taking away too much? How do we find a guy who's, we go out and get either in free agency or via trade that's not going to move the needle in terms of internet buzz, but is going to be a real nice fit, like an Isaiah Hartenstein or an Alex Caruso, or that type of player who's not an all-star, but somebody who could come in and help make a difference, maybe that the fans don't expect to make a difference, but the front office does. So if I had to take a guess, the way the Hawks are viewing things, that would be the most logical approach is, we don't want to trade Trae Young or Ricochet and go get a big name or Jalen Johnson or any of those guys. How do we find pieces that fit around a really nice young core with Trae Young having played really, to me, a career season when you look at his full body of work this past year, and a coach that the players seem to trust and like? How do we grow together and find that piece or two without shaking things up?
Yeah, I think that's really the big thing is, like I said, how can you add? Especially if you are, because I mean, early on and even in the process of the president of basketball operations, they kind of said from the sideline, like, hey, they want someone who can continue to build around the young players that they have. It wasn't, hey, they would want to blow it up and get somebody. Obviously, people wondering about Giannis. Now seems like it's swaying that he'll stay in Milwaukee. We'll see until he actually makes that final decision. I mean, it looks like Zion's not going anywhere. I mean, the KD sweepstakes, but even that, a lot of teams are viewing him as a one-year guy. Do you trade a young player from your core for a one-year rental? I mean, those are some of the things that when you look at it, it may be better for the Hawks to just stay on the path they are. And so obviously a big thing with that is one thing looming for them is the Trae Young extension this offseason. Just what do you think? Do you see in your predictions Trae Young signing something, or do you kind of see him kind of waiting a little bit, maybe going into the season or even next year?
Yeah, that's hard to predict. I foresee from everything he has said and everything the Hawks have said, which hasn't been a whole lot since these front office changes, but I think that the way that he ran the offense last year and his ability to score on top of that, became an assist guy, but his ability to score, and it's hard to find players like that. I mean, I know that Trae, I'm up here in the Midwest, but I hear, and read everything and see everything. And I know that Trae from the fan base can undergo some criticism, for defense or that kind of stuff. But I think when you look at these teams in the finals, and Trae Young has addressed this recently, as you know. He said, he's an Oklahoma guy. He's from Oklahoma. He sees the Thunder in the finals, and he says, look at this is a team that took some lumps and bumps along the way, not this season, but the season before and the season before that. And yet here they are. And what's the common denominator that the Thunder and the Pacers have? Well, it's a dynamic point guard, right? And then you have both of those teams really have a very good backcourt defender to go with that dynamic point guard. Well, and the Hawks are already set up there. You have Trae Young, you have Dyson Daniels. You don't want to move that, I wouldn't think. So, with Trae Young saying he wants to stay in Atlanta and him being the face of the franchise, and it's not like he hasn't won before. I mean, the guy took you to the Eastern Conference Finals, 3 years ago? So, these are the type of players who have been there before. He showed that he's willing to change his game for the good of the team. I just think, if you're Atlanta and you're Trae Young, you should keep this going and stay together. The one thing I like, Bryce, about this gang of 35 and younger crowd, is they're not so big. It's not like and this isn't a shot at this generation, it's just a different way of thinking. But the 35 and overs of the Kevin Durant's, James Harden's, LeBron James, it was always kind of like, what's next? Where do I go next to win more? Whereas to me, it seems like this generation of NBA players, from everything I've seen, looking at like a guy like Donovan Mitchell, hearing what Trae Young has said, these guys aren't like looking to move on. They want to stay with their current teams. I mean, Luka Doncic, he's probably the first player in NBA history to cry when he got traded to the Lakers, right? So I think that these guys in this generation are more apt to ride it out and stay with their program, unless things just go terribly south. But that's not where the Hawks are. So that's a really long-winded answer to your question, but I think that, in the end, there's going to be some rumors, as there always is around Trae Young. But I think in the end that the team and the star player are going to stay together for a while.
Yeah, and I think too, it is funny because they've asked Trae about the extension. He hasn't really answered it. He's just trying to focus. He was trying to focus on the season, but he's hinted. He's been very positive about Quinn. He's been very positive about Jalen. He's been very positive about the young players, taking Ricochet under his wing. He's even said when they asked about Dyson, he's like, I look forward to growing with him in years to come. Like, he says things, it's like, sounds like the man's going to be around. It's just one of those things where I think at the same time, he also just wants to make sure they're headed in the right direction. And for the Hawks, it seems like you're trending up. Because I always say when stars leave, the team's trending down. Like you can see, like, they're like, I think this is the dead end. Hawks are not trending down. So it'd be weird for him to say I want out, but they're trending up. That just would be a little different. So I do agree with you on the Trae Young standpoint of things. Now, obviously, with them trying to add pieces to fit this team, there was a report earlier today, Hawks may be interested in Miles Turner from the Pacers side. We heard from Shams that Pacers plan to re-sign him. So some people are wondering, is this just smokescreen? How it goes, leaking things. Is this legit? Obviously, the Hawks right now, their starting center is Onyeka Okongwu, who is, within the Hawks community, it's very split. Some people really love him, and some people don't because of his height. What do you think about the Miles Turner Atlanta? Is that just fire in the smoke? Is something real here? Or?
I wouldn't think it's too real. I think he's going to go back to Indiana. I mean, this would be different if the Pacers were lost in the first round or something. I would be surprised. Pacers probably offer him more money than anybody else to return to a situation that he knows. So I think that's a long shot. Now the Hawks are going to have to do something, I would assume, for backup center with probably Clint Capella. I'd be surprised if he's back. But, there are ways to go out and do that without mortgaging the farm or overspending. And that's one thing that I think that any front office wants to do with this new collective bargaining agreement, the new labor rules. You want to stay flexible. And there are ways to find guys like Thomas Bryant, who's the backup center for the Pacers. Again, not a big splashy move, but a guy who just fit there on a team that went to the finals, right? So I think that as fans, we can get caught up in kind of the splash and the noise and, this team really needs to do this. And that's fair. I mean, fans are the word short for fanatical, right? So, I mean, that's the way we're supposed to behave. But I think that, again, with Atlanta, and here's the other thing you have to remember. If things aren't working out, you run it back with a couple of new pieces and it doesn't work out, you have all the way till February, early February to make a trade if it doesn't work. So with the Miles Turner stuff, I think that's a long shot, incredibly long shot. Kevin Durant, I would be stunned if the Hawks had true interest. And any of these big splashy names. Now, their own pieces and potentially kind of those seventh, eighth, ninth man pieces. I think that those are going to be in play all off season or most of the off season, at least till July for Atlanta.
Yeah, and I think too, I tell people after the DeJounte Murray trade, when the Hawks lost all those assets, and even I already bring up the Saddiq Bey trade when they gave up 5 seconds. They've been working to try to get some of those assets back, and so I've always said it would be very risky again in today's CBA, where you have to build rosters to try to make another big move, and now you have really no assets because and it's just where are you getting better, especially with the aprons? Like where are you getting better if that happens? So I feel like for them, it's just like I said, making the right moves that still give them flexibility and maybe even trying to gain more flexibility in the future.
Sure.
Another person that they're looking at potentially bringing back is Caris LeVert. He's a guy who, for what this team needs, they do need another guy who can create, which Caris can. But also, we also understand Caris LeVert is a roller coaster. He will give you 5 points and on this very inefficient shooting, but he can also give you 30. You obviously you've covered Cleveland. You know what Caris LeVert has brought to the table. We know throughout his career what he's been. What is the likelihood there for you to think that they're going to bring it back Caris, even hearing that some other teams also have interest in him as well? Because I think the big thing is just what is that number going to look like?
Yeah, that's the question, right? Is how much are you paying him to come back? I know that Atlanta would like him to come back. And look, when you lose, let's say Caris LeVert goes elsewhere, well, now you got to try to replace him, right? And yes, he can be a roller coaster, as you said. I mean, and that's just who he is. He's 31 years old. That's not going to change. There may not be another guy out there who can give you 30 points, that's playing his role. That's the nice thing about him. He gets after it. He's just a fantastic individual to have around the team. I mean, he never, ever complains. He's one of those guys the coach says, you played 12 minutes tonight. Sorry, I just couldn't find whatever. It's fine. So he gets after it defensively. He's a good wing defender, which in the NBA comes at a premium. And he can. There are going to be nights. Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, he's missing layups and he's not helping offensively. But there's never any question about his effort. So yeah, that's what you have to figure out if Atlanta. Both sides want a reunion. I don't think there's any question about that. It's what does that number look like? How do we make that work? What does outside interest look like? I guess with something like that, you just have to wait and see what the market. Caris LeVert's probably not a first day free agent signing for anybody. He may be a 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in free agent signing. And if it gets to 3 weeks, or longer, that number starts to go down for the Hawks. So, so much of it's going to depend on, what do teams like that have the cap space, like a Detroit or the Nets, what are those teams, what are they willing to spend on guys who are 7th or 8th men? Houston potentially could create a lot of cap space. Is that, Caris LeVert, as much as he offers, is not going to be a guy that people are going to go out and, spend all their available salary, especially in this era of second apron and all that. So I think if I just had to sit here and predict that he'll return to Atlanta, I just think that it's going to work out at some point. But, you have to leave the possibility open that somebody could offer him something more and he's gone. And then you got to fill that. People, when you talk about any player on any team, We got to trade this guy or do not re-sign this guy. It's like, well, how do you replace? Every team needs a seventh or eighth man, right? And most of those guys in the league are seventh and eighth men because they're inconsistent. So, here you have a guy in Levert who's familiar with the program. I would think that he fit in perfectly, and you would want him back, give him a full training camp with Atlanta.
Yeah, and like I said, he done some really good things. He was crucial in the Miami game, in the playing game. I mean, you saw how they had to rely on the veterans late in that game, guys who have experience in that situation. And speaking of veterans, obviously another person that we got from Cleveland, George Nieng, a guy who aka G Wagon, guy shoots 40% from the three. We understand his athletic limitations. That's but for the most part in Cleveland, I think they used him more as a 3-point shooter. Where in Atlanta, they were like, all right, we need a little bit more offense from you, which at times George could get. I think he's one of those players that, you look at and just think, ew, George is Nieng. But at the same time, he can drop 20 on you. And you're like, oh, And so what did you think? What do you think about like how his fit's been in Atlanta? Obviously, they had to make that move after Jalen went down just to try to get somebody at the 4. What do you think about the job he did once he got to Atlanta? And seemingly seems like, he'll be a part of the rotation next year as well with the team.
He does a lot of things. Like you said, he has the athletic limitations, but another guy who's kind of a connector in the sense that I don't care how many shots I get, I'm going to bring it. I thought personally, now look, for the Cavs, you make that trade every day of the week, twice on Sunday. But I thought in the playoffs, watching the Cavs, watching them during the regular season before that trade and then after, now, in fairness to DeAndre Hunter, need some time to adapt. But the point being, they really miss George Niang's toughness. And that's one thing he will bring. He stands up for his teammates. He's great in the locker room. He livens things up. He usually makes winning plays. Again, this is a guy off your bench for the most part who, despite his limitations and his inconsistencies and his times where he drives fans and perhaps even the coaching staff crazy, I think he was invaluable in so many ways. And I think the more that he gets used to the program next year and a full training camp, obviously very familiar with Quinn Snyder from their time together in Utah, I just think, again, these are the kind of guys you need, veteran guys you need around a otherwise young core, right? So guys who are unselfish, play hard, play their roles, don't complain, build their teammates up. And Niang definitely fits in that mold. And like you just said, oh, look, he had 25. I thought he played better in Atlanta than he's played anywhere else in his career. And I think that that's a positive sign moving forward because he's such a great teammate. So if he can contribute on the court as well, like putting up some numbers, yeah, it's a win.
Yeah, especially, I mean, also his trash talking.
Very underrated.
George Niang's definitely funny. I'll give him that, man. Like I said, he'll drive some people crazy, but sometimes you have those players. I always say, you get to the bench, these guys, there's something they do really well, and there's some stuff they don't. And I think, we always are critical because in game we want to win. Teams want to win. They want the teams to win. But, hey, there's going to be moments where there's going to be a struggle and moments where it's great. And so you got to take everything, good and bad, all together. So going to the young core now, I just want to get your thoughts on some of the players that they have, just because, again, young, a lot of potential. Some people are trying to figure out what is certain guys' ceiling. So let's start with Zachary Richichet. Obviously coming out of France, some people wonder, should he have been the first pick? Obviously, we know the draft class was not some generational prospect at the beginning. Hawks felt like he was the best guy for the program, what they wanted to do. Obviously, beginning of the year, he was working through it. I feel like playing in France, the level of competition increases. You have to adjust to that. He mentioned I used to be one of the most athletic people in France, and now I'm in the league and I'm not. And so he acknowledged that adjustment period, and we saw as the season moved on, we saw a better increasement of play. I remember the game against Cleveland the first half when he went like 7 of 7, 21 points, and so you saw flashes of like, okay, this is a player here. What do you think about him after his first year and what he can be for this team?
I think he has all-star potential for sure, and I think that you have a guy who, at the very worst, in my opinion, is going to be a long-time, very good starter. And that's worst case scenario. I think he's got a nice upside. Usually these guys, 3 years, look at Evan Mobley in Cleveland. He never really lived up to expectations those first 3 years. Year 4 took it through the roof, won Defensive Player of the Year, second team All NBA. Obviously, different types of players, but I think that you just have to be patient. But I think that right away, you have a guy who's a starter and a quality starter at worst on a playoff team, and again, I think that there's something, not every guy is going to be a 4 or 5-time All-Star, Hall of Famer, but I think he has that potential. I think he has the potential to be a difference maker in a winning environment. And that's huge. If you can get that in the draft, even at number 1, so we look at how many times people missed on number 1, right? The Hawks did not. So to me, I just think the sky's the limit for him. I think that he's in a good program with a really good coach. And, you want to have that solid foundation when you're a rookie, and there's a lot of pressure on you. And that's the nice thing about Ricochet. He's in a good environment and a place where they can afford to be patient with him and live through the mistakes. And then, like you said, you see these games where it's like, wow, look at what this kid can do. And his ceiling he's nowhere near his ceiling, you believe. So I like him, think he's going to be a real nice player for them for quite some time.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, we know coming into the league, putting on more weight, just naturally, young guy, they said, obviously, this isn't France food anymore. This is American food. And we got to put weight on. You know what I'm saying? And so that'll help just, naturally with his game, just getting stronger and just more consistency. I think that's the biggest thing. If he can just get more consistent, he doesn't have to be the big 30 points. If he can become consistent, like 15, 16 consistently, I think that's a good step for him instead of the wide variation of games that he can sometimes bring. And then on top of that, I think a lot of people also mention how he has especially when you're coming from like the other leagues and overseas, sometimes people's games are more, they say, more mature.
Yeah.
Really good cutter, which people say is a lost art in America's game. Has some good defensive principles, things of that nature. So I think there's some things that you can definitely build off of, and I can see why the Hawks really liked him. And then another guy who, they really liked, who really was able to get a chance to fully show it, was Dyson Daniels.
Yeah.
Second in Defensive Player of the Year, first team all defense, most improved player in the league. A lot of people, when we got him in that trade, people, if you know ball, I would say you were like, all right, I know what Dyson is defensively. We just didn't know what offense. We didn't know.
Yeah.
And I think some people thought his offense was maybe better than some people expected. And that's something he's mentioned he wants to continue to build, because he said, I want to take pressure off Trey if I can. What do you think about how Dyson did in his first year as a full-time starter for this team?
I think he was one of the NBA's biggest, most pleasant surprises, right? At the time of that trade, like you said, everybody knew he was a pretty good defender. I think if you watch like Andrew Nembhard with the Pacers and what he offers them in terms of he's always guarding the opposing best wing. He makes winning plays. He doesn't get too riled up. To me, that's, Dyson Daniels, to me, is probably a better version of that, the way he played this last year. And you think about how important that is, as we've seen these playoffs and these type of players, not just with the Pacers and the Thunder, but other teams that are having success in the postseason have these guys. Minnesota has these guys. It's just, these are the type of players that you need. Again, maybe not an all-star, right? But just so valuable to your program that in your program, with the Atlanta Hawks, he's an all-star, Dyson Daniels. So what a great find in that trade. What a much better fit next to Trae Young than DeJounte Murray was. And no shot at DeJounte Murray, fantastic player, but it's all about what we're seeing in the past probably 7 years of NBA finalists. It's not about compiling stars, it's about compiling fits. And he was an excellent fit next to Trae Young. Really, exactly the type of guard that they needed to put next to Trae Young, in my opinion. And again, a younger player who's grown, who still has a nice ceiling. And as we've seen in repeatedly throughout teams that are in contention, true contention, they have a backcourt defensive stopper. You look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, for instance, 64-18, no stopper in the backcourt, right? And especially none after they got rid of LeVert. So, I think that that's a huge key to being successful. And we heard Trae Young the other day again, looks at the Oklahoma City Thunder and said, I don't think we're that far away. And I think if you look at this roster, the key pieces, he's probably right.
Yeah, and I think too, it's really important, especially if you are building your team kind of from the backcourt, to just really have those fits. Because sometimes we've seen players that are good in the backcourt together, but it's not a great fit, like you mentioned with the DeJounte. But this fit just seems like it's more seamless. You have the offensive, point of the team and Trae driving it, and then you have the defensive point of the team and Dyson driving that side of the ball. And then obviously Dyson trying to get his offensive game to a point where the offense can still be really good on the offensive side and keep the team being able to go on both ends, which we've also seen the effect people have made mention. Seeing Dyson's effort has made other players on the team want to play with more effort defensively as well, just because it's a very infectious type of thing. So, he's been really big for what they're doing, and obviously looking forward to see what he does in his second full year. Now, let's talk about the guy who kind of runs the entire ship to get those players where they need to be, Quinn Snyder. He's a guy who a lot of people are kind of split on a little bit. I think people acknowledge him as a good coach, but some people have questioned rotations at times and have questioned other things. Now, they have had injuries that have kind of forced him to make certain decisions. I know one of the things from this past season is that sometimes he would just go small when, when stuff would happen. Just because the big, especially when Clint and Larry Nance went down, you had some young guys that maybe just weren't ready to play big minutes outside of Okongwu. Right. What do you think about the job he's done in Atlanta so far? Obviously, I would say this coming season is like the first year with him being here that there will be some pressure to win. But what do you think about the job Quinn has done while he's been the head coach?
Yeah, I think, when you factor in the injuries and some inconsistencies in terms of guys staying healthy that are rotational players, I think he's done just fine. I think that he's proven that he can win. He did that in Utah. He's proven that he can take teams places. Again, to me, he seems like, if I'm looking at it, a pretty good coach. And it's just a roster that you have to be patient with because he's not dealing with a super experienced roster. He's managing players who can be inconsistent because they're young. And again, sometimes, you want a new voice or a new leader, but when you see how Trae Young's game has developed and changed and was a fantastic player before Quinn Snyder, but I think that last year Trae had a career year because of the way he played and the way he distributed the ball. He can put up 40 if he wants. It's what else can you do? Well, I thought Trae proved that, and I thought Quinn Snyder was a big voice in getting Trae to change that game and say, you know what, we're going to win more if you play this way, and you're still probably going to be an all-star, or at least deserve to be an all-star. And that was absolutely the case. So there's a lot to be said for in the NBA with only 5 guys on the floor at a time. There's so much to be said for if your star player and your coach are on the same page and they see eye to eye, especially when your star player's in a position now of Trae Young as, the oldest star on the team, right? So I just think if your point guard is an extension of your coach, and the point guard just also happens to be your best player and the face of the franchise, I think that carries you a long way. Now, we've seen Trey in the past, right? This again is just acknowledging what's happened. Nate McMillan issues, Lloyd Pierce issues, so the fact that Quinn and Trey have this special connection, and Quinn Snyder is seen as a very flexible coach when it comes to listening to the players and getting their input and reacting and saying, you know what, great idea, let's put that in. I think that there's, a lot of positive things. Look, we all think that it's probably the only profession where we all think we could do a better job, yet we never go do it, right? I mean? I'm not looking at some engineer and say, well, what's he doing this for? And why is he doing that? Now, maybe I did if that's all I did was follow engineering. But with coaches, we all know and think we can do a better job. And I think that, to me, Quinn Snyder is the guy for this team right now. There's no reason to shake things up in that area. He has shown no reason, especially when this team, you think, okay, next season is our year to take a step. Well, now you find out if this is the coach to get you there.
Yeah, especially since the playoffs have played out the way they have, and it seems the East is very wide open.
Yeah.
So I think people are kind of like, hey, why can't we make noise? And even though Pacers made it, it's not like, the Pacers are like, man, there's nobody who can compete with the Pacers right now. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, they're a really good team. Rick Carlisle's really good coach. But, people feel like they're a very beatable team. Like if you don't allow blown leads in the last minute of a game, you can beat the team. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how things play out with the Hawks this coming season. With the draft coming up, they have 2 picks in the first round. Interested to see what they do there and then what they do in free agency from that point. But I appreciate you coming on to the show, man, for sure, man. Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah. Hoopswire.com is our website, and I think we're in year 3 now with that. And then on Twitter or X at Amico Hoops, and I'm also on Blue Sky and Threads at the same address. And that's basically it. I host a show here in Cleveland with former Cavs guard Boobie Gibson. We're on sabbatical until next season, but that's on FanDuel Sports Network. I've been told nationwide, but who knows? So I don't tune in, so I don't know. But that's on FanDuel Sports Network. It's called Full Court, and that runs during basketball season pretty much nightly. With former Cavs guard Boobie Gibson, we get some guests on there. I keep pushing them. I'm like, you played with LeBron, right? Get LeBron. So, what are you doing? I'll take the day off. Just have LeBron in. But so I do that. That's where you can find all my stuff. And I honestly think that the Hawks, to me, as a guy who runs a website, we cover all the teams, are truly one of the more intriguing storylines flying under the radar. Because like you said, Bryce, it's wide open. Both the East and the West, wide open. So I think Atlanta's right there, right on the doorstep, and who knows what they could do next year. But I think possibilities are endless with the Hawks.
Yeah, and obviously health will be a big part of that. And like I said, the moves they continue to make to continue to grow this team moving forward, and the growth and steps made by their young core. So it'll be very interesting and exciting to kind of see what happens there. But obviously, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a comment, like the video. Follow me on X at Bryce_2K as well for all my Hawks takes and everything in the sun. We'll keep an eye on what's happening as we get closer to the draft, and the offseason starts to really get active after the NBA Finals concludes, whenever that will be. But that's about it for the show today. I'm Bryce. That's Sam. See you next time.